History is often told through great hunts, fearless warriors, and inventions that changed the world. But what if one of the most frequently repeated stories about prehistoric life isn't entirely true? As archaeology enters the age of DNA, the role of women in the distant past is beginning to emerge in a way that looks very different from what we have long imagined. Everything began to change as biological analysis became increasingly precise. In 2020, a study published in Science Advances revealed findings from the Willamaya-Pachcha archaeological site in Peru, where a roughly 9,000-year-old burial contained a complete set of large game hunting tools. For many years, the individual buried there had been assumed to be a man. However, protein analysis from tooth enamel and examination of the skeletal structure confirmed that the remains belonged to a young woman. When the researchers expanded their dataset to include hundreds of skeletons from archaeological sites across the Americas, they estimated that roughly 30 to 50% of the individuals buried with large game hunting tools may have been women. That pattern was further reinforced by modern anthropological research. A 2023 review covering 63 hunter-gatherer societies found that 79% of those communities documented women participating in hunting in one form or another. In some groups, they hunted small animals. In others, they joined the entire hunting party in pursuing large prey, using bows, spears, or traps, and sometimes even bringing young children with them. Discoveries involving Neanderthals tell a remarkably similar story. Analyses of carbon and nitrogen isotopes preserved in their bones show that men and women had nearly identical diets, both relying heavily on the meat of large animals. Many female skeletons also bear healed fractures in the shoulders, arms, or ribs, suggesting they regularly took part in physically demanding work or faced dangerous environments. Today, most anthropologists agree that the role of women constantly shifted depending on the human species, the environment, the season, and the stage of life. During pregnancy or while caring for young children, they may have prioritized safer tasks. But at other times, they also hunted, crafted tools, processed food, traveled long distances, and contributed directly to the survival of the entire community. But if prehistoric women were never simply the ones waiting inside the cave, when did that role truly begin? How were the very first mothers able to become pregnant, give birth, and protect their young before there was fire, before sophisticated tools existed, and while predators surrounded them on every side? To answer that, we must travel back in time to the earliest hominins, where humanity's journey into motherhood had only just begun. Around 4.4 million years ago, a female Ardipithecus may have had to leave her resting place before sunrise to search for ripe fruit, young leaves, seeds, roots, insects, or bird eggs. Food sources were unpredictable, while East Africa was gradually transforming from dense forests into open woodlands and grasslands as the climate became increasingly dry. Every foraging trip carried the risk of encountering leopards, ancient hyenas, or crocodiles near water sources. Some of the most important insights into this period come from the famous fossil known as Ardi, discovered in Ethiopia. Ardi stood about 4 feet tall, weighed nearly 110 pounds, and possessed a body that seemed to stand between two worlds. Her big toe still splayed outward for gripping tree branches, but her pelvis had already begun adapting for walking upright on the ground. This suggests that Ardipithecus both climbed trees to forage or escape predators, and spent more time moving across the ground than earlier apes. For a pregnant mother, balancing between climbing and walking upright would certainly have been an enormous challenge. Another discovery from Ardi has also changed the way we view the society of the earliest hominins. The males had canine teeth that were much smaller than those of modern chimpanzees, and showed little difference from those of females. To paleoanthropologists, this suggests that violent competition between males may have declined. That opens the possibility that individuals were beginning to form more stable social bonds, share food, or help one another care for their young. As human ancestors spent more time walking on two legs and gradually lost body hair through the course of evolution, their infants could no longer cling securely to their mother's fur as many modern primates do. Mothers likely had to use one arm to hold or support their babies while traveling and foraging. Having one arm constantly occupied made climbing trees, gathering food, or defending themselves far more difficult. The need to care for helpless infants may have encouraged cooperation among group members from a very early stage. Perhaps this was one of the first building blocks that laid the foundation for the communal way of life that would later help humanity survive. Looking back, what allowed humanity's first mothers to survive was not superior strength or greater speed than the predators around them. It was resilience, adaptability, and the social bonds that were gradually taking shape. Every child who lived to adulthood was the result of thousands of good decisions accumulated day after day. From choosing where to forage and avoiding predators, to sharing scarce food with one another. Those unnamed mothers laid the very first foundation for humanity's entire evolutionary journey. But around 4 million years ago, nature brought about an even greater turning point. Some of their descendants began walking upright with increasing skill. Their hands were freed, opening the possibility of carrying food, making tools, and caring for their young in ways never before possible. That seemingly simple change permanently transformed pregnancy, childbirth, and the raising of children. The most famous evidence comes from the skeleton known as Lucy, an Australopithecus afarensis individual who lived about 3.2 million years ago in what is now Ethiopia. Lucy stood only about 3 feet 7 inches tall and weighed around 60 pounds, yet her skeleton transformed the way we understand our ancestors. Her pelvis, knees, and feet reveal that she regularly walked upright on 2 legs, while her long arms and curved fingers show that her climbing ability had not disappeared. Lucy seemed to live between 2 worlds: the ground, where she searched for food, and the trees, where she escaped predators or rested. It was this remarkable flexibility that allowed mothers to expand their foraging range while still maintaining their chances of survival. Another discovery at Latoli, Tanzania, further strengthens this picture. Preserved in a layer of volcanic ash about 3.66 million years old, scientists found footprints that show a walking pattern strikingly similar to that of modern humans. The heel touched the ground first, weight shifted through the arch of the foot, and the body was pushed forward by the big toe. Instead of relying on all four limbs for movement, she could now carry her child while transporting food or branches, all while scanning farther across the open grasslands for approaching predators. But evolution has never brought only advantages. To make upright walking more efficient, the pelvis gradually changed shape to support body weight more effectively. During the time of Australopithecus, the brain measured only about 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, so childbirth had not yet become a major challenge. Even so, evolution had already introduced a problem that would follow humanity for millions of years. How could our ancestors become increasingly efficient at walking on two legs while still being able to give birth to babies with ever-growing brains? The next major turning point came around 2.6 million years ago, when the first Oldowan stone tools appeared, associated with Homo habilis, and possibly with some later Australopithecus populations as well. They were nothing more than stones chipped to create sharp edges, yet they opened an entirely new way of obtaining food. Before this, an animal carcass abandoned by predators was almost useless because its hide was too thick and its bones too hard. Now, with a sharp stone flake, early humans could slice away the remaining meat and break open bones to reach the marrow, a remarkably valuable source of fat and energy, especially for pregnant or breastfeeding women. Microwear analyses of Oldowan tools also show that they were used not only for processing meat, but also for cutting plants, stripping bark, digging up tubers, and preparing many other kinds of food. This made nutrition more varied and more reliable. More importantly, food began to be shared within communities more often than before. A mother was no longer completely dependent on whatever she could find by herself each day. It was a small step, but one that laid the foundation for the social cooperation that would flourish in later human species. Better nutrition also made it possible for the brain of Homo habilis to grow to approximately 510 to 700 cubic centimeters. The increase was not dramatic, but it marked the beginning of a trend that would shape the entire history of human evolution. Brains would continue to grow larger, children would require more time to mature, and the role of mothers would become increasingly important. If the brain continued to expand, could the mother's body keep pace? Would a pelvis optimized for upright walking still be wide enough to give birth to increasingly intelligent children? The answer would arrive with a new human species about 2 million years ago. They were taller, traveled farther, learned to harness fire, and became the first humans to leave Africa and spread across new lands. Yet that very success pushed mothers into the greatest biological challenge in evolutionary history. Around 1.9 million years ago, Homo erectus appeared and quickly became the first human species to leave Africa. expanding into Western Asia and later East Asia. With long legs, well-balanced bodies, and an ability to walk long distances much like modern humans, they could follow herds of animals across journeys stretching hundreds of miles. But the greatest achievement of Homo erectus was not those remarkable migrations. It unfolded quietly within the bodies of mothers. The brain of this species grew from about 600 cubic centimeters in its early populations to nearly 1,000 to 1,100 cubic centimeters in later ones. A larger brain meant better memory, more sophisticated tool-making, and greater adaptability. Yet with every step forward in brain development, childbirth became more difficult. This is the famous paradox of human evolution. To walk efficiently on two legs, the pelvis had to remain compact enough to conserve energy during movement. But a fetus with an increasingly larger head required a wider birth canal. The timing of birth is determined not only by the size of the pelvis, but also by the mother's ability to supply energy. Once the fetus reaches the maximum level of energy that the mother's body can sustain, pregnancy must come to an end. As a result, human babies are born while their brains are still far from fully developed and continue growing at an extraordinary pace after birth. Unable to sit on their own, unable to find food for themselves, and almost completely dependent on adults throughout the first years of life. Yet it was precisely this helplessness that became humanity's greatest advantage. The brain continued developing within a social environment where children learned language, observed others, imitated behaviors, and accumulated experience. The price mothers paid, however, was enormous. Imagine a Homo erectus woman who had just given birth. She still had to travel with her group in search of water, gather food, or move toward new hunting grounds, while her child needed to be carried constantly and breastfed for years. A mother alone could hardly meet all of those demands. For this reason, many anthropologists believe that by the time of Homo erectus, cooperative childcare among multiple group members, known as alloparenting, had become a crucial survival strategy. For the first time, a child was no longer solely the responsibility of its mother, but became an investment shared by the entire community. Perhaps this was evolution's greatest invention, even more important than stone spears or fire. Another hypothesis also helps explain why humans became so successful: the grandmother hypothesis. Grandmothers could care for grandchildren, share food, and pass on knowledge, allowing their daughters to have more children while increasing the survival chances of the entire family line. Although this hypothesis is still being actively studied, observations of many modern hunter-gatherer societies show that children often have higher survival rates when supported by their maternal grandmothers. It reminds us that a woman's role does not end with childbirth. She also becomes a guardian of knowledge and a bridge through which life continues across generations. During this same period, Homo erectus also achieved significant technological advances, Even more importantly, evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests that they had learned to control fire around 1 million years ago. Cooked food became softer, easier to digest, and allowed the body to extract more energy from the same amount of food. For pregnant or breastfeeding women, that dependable source of energy was especially significant because every additional calorie helped nourish the developing brain of the next generation. Looking back, the success of Homo erectus did not come simply from traveling farther or thinking more intelligently. It came from turning the task of raising a child into the responsibility of an entire community. When larger brains created a biological burden that seemed almost impossible to overcome, evolution did not choose to make mothers stronger. Instead, it chose to make society more closely connected. Yet a few 100,000 years later, Earth entered prolonged cycles of ice ages. In that frozen world, the lives of mothers would once again be tested by Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, human species that transformed adaptability into the key to survival on an icy planet. From about 700,000 to 40,000 years ago, the descendants of Homo erectus, including Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, had to adapt to a planet colder than ever before. For pregnant women, this was an immense biological challenge. Their bodies had to maintain a core temperature of about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, while simultaneously nourishing a developing fetus. Modern physiological models estimate that a pregnant Neanderthal woman may have required roughly 4,000 to 5,000 kilocalories per day, significantly more than the energy needs of most modern women. If food supplies were interrupted even briefly, the body would prioritize the mother's survival first, while the fetus would be the first to suffer the consequences. Long periods without sunlight also reduce the body's ability to produce vitamin D, while diets lacking meat or organ meats could easily lead to iron deficiency. Without medicine or hospitals, every pregnancy was truly a battle against nature. What is remarkable is that they did not merely survive. They thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeological discoveries at Schöningen, Germany, show that Homo heidelbergensis crafted wooden spears nearly 8 feet long, powerful enough to hunt large game. They knew how to maintain fire, build shelters, and organize life within groups. These advances did more than improve hunting efficiency. They created a safer environment for pregnant women and young children. For the first time in evolutionary history, a mother's survival no longer depended entirely on her own strength, but on the coordinated efforts of an entire community. When the Neanderthals emerged, adaptation to extreme cold reached an astonishing level. They possessed short, powerfully built bodies, broad chests, and shorter limbs, features that reduced heat loss in freezing environments. Analyses of carbon and nitrogen isotopes preserved in their bones reveal that male and female Neanderthals shared remarkably similar diets, relying heavily on large animals such as bison, reindeer, and wild horses. This suggests that women were far from isolated from the community's survival activities. Even stronger evidence is preserved within their skeletons themselves. At archaeological sites such as Shanidar in Iraq and Krapina in Croatia, many female Neanderthals bore healed fractures in their ribs, arms, and shoulders that had completely recovered long before they died. This means they had survived severe injuries and continued living for many years afterward. Without long-term food sharing, care, and protection, this would have been almost impossible. European caves have also preserved evidence of tools used to cut, tan, and sew animal hides. These were more than simple garments. For an infant born during a winter below freezing, a carefully prepared hide could mean the difference between life and death. Behind every fur garment lay hours of meticulous work, scraping away fat, softening the hide, and stitching pieces together into insulating layers. If Neanderthals symbolize adaptation to bitter cold, then Denisovans represent another extraordinary achievement. Although scientists have discovered only a handful of Denisovan fossils, ancient DNA reveals that they successfully lived in high-altitude regions above 13,000 feet. This appears to have been made possible by a variant of the EPAS1 gene, which allows the body to use oxygen more efficiently in thin air. Even more remarkable, this genetic variant was passed to the ancestors of modern Tibetans through interbreeding between the two human species. Yet despite their physical strength, extraordinary adaptability, and valuable genetic advantages, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and Denisovans all eventually disappeared. Today, most scientists believe there was no single cause. Climate change, populations that had become too small, isolation between groups, and competition with Homo sapiens most likely combined to create a perfect storm. But they did not vanish completely. They left behind genes that still survive in many people today. It was this foundation that paved the way for the emergence of Homo sapiens. Imagine a group of Homo sapiens living around 40,000 years ago. During the earliest years of life, children spent most of their time beside their mothers and older women. As a result, these women did far more than provide food. They passed on the knowledge that allowed the next generation to survive in a world filled with danger. We can still observe this today among hunter-gatherer communities such as the Hadza of Tanzania and the San of southern Africa. Children learn to recognize hundreds of species of plants, roots, and fruits simply by following the adults. They learn which ones can be eaten, which must be cooked, which can be used as medicine, and which must be avoided at all costs. A single mistake could mean the difference between life and death. Every piece of knowledge that was passed down was therefore the result of countless generations of observation and trial. At the same time, archaeology shows that Homo sapiens developed innovations that profoundly transformed everyday life. At Blombos Cave in South Africa and many late Stone Age archaeological sites, scientists have uncovered evidence of bead making, pigment processing, hide tanning, fiber weaving, and, later, bone sewing needles. It is impossible to determine whether any particular tool was made by men or women, but ethnographic studies show that in many hunter-gatherer societies, women often play central roles in food processing, basket making, fiber production, hide sewing, and the creation of everyday tools. Another defining characteristic of Homo sapiens was the ability to build extensive social networks. Archaeologists have discovered seashells, obsidian, and various pigments that had been transported dozens, even hundreds of miles from their original sources. This suggests that human groups did not live in complete isolation, but regularly exchanged materials, gifts, and perhaps even survival knowledge. When one region experienced drought or food shortages, these connections became a safety net that helped communities endure hardship. Through marriages between different groups, women may also have carried knowledge of medicinal plants, edible foods, food preparation techniques, and childcare practices, turning every migration into a pathway for the spread of knowledge. All of this reached its full potential only when combined with language. Although the exact moment when modern language emerged remains unknown, most researchers agree that Homo sapiens developed communication sophisticated enough to recount the past, plan for the future, and pass knowledge to the next generation. Perhaps this was the greatest achievement of Homo sapiens. Throughout that process, women did more than raise children. They safeguarded the storehouse of knowledge that enabled entire societies to survive long before humans ever invented writing. But around 12,000 years ago, as people began settling down, farming crops, and domesticating animals, that very role would face an entirely new challenge. Civilization was being born, but did life truly become better for women? Or were they simply stepping into a different kind of burden? For millions of years before that, hunter-gatherer groups constantly moved in search of food. A mother could hardly carry two children who were not yet able to walk over journeys stretching dozens of miles at the same time, so the interval between births typically lasted 3 to 5 years. But once humans settled in permanent communities, food was stored close to where they lived, allowing young children to be fed grain porridge earlier and weaned sooner. In many communities, the interval between births shrank to just 1 or 2 years. The population grew at an unprecedented rate, laying the foundation for the rise of civilization. Yet the price was paid largely by women's bodies. Pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing became far more frequent, placing greater strain on their nutrition and health than at any previous stage of human history. Agriculture did more than change the way humans reproduced. It transformed the human diet itself. During the hunter-gatherer era, people ate a diverse range of foods, including meat, fish, fruits, nuts, roots, and seasonal plants. After the transition to farming, many communities became dependent on just a few staple crops such as wheat, barley, or millet. Analyses of thousands of Neolithic skeletons from Western Asia, Europe, and the Americas reveal that average height declined, tooth decay became more common, and signs of iron deficiency anemia appeared far more frequently. For pregnant women, iron deficiency not only weakened the body but also directly affected fetal development. This presents a striking paradox. Humanity was producing more food than ever before, yet the nutritional quality of many communities actually declined. Another discovery is even more surprising. In 2017, researchers at the University of Cambridge compared the arm bones of women who lived around 7,000 years ago with those of modern women. The results showed that their bones were 11 to 16% stronger than even those of today's elite rowers. This did not mean they were stronger because of athletic training. Rather, it reflected the countless hours they spent every day grinding grain with stone querns, carrying water, working in the fields, weaving textiles, and preparing food. Civilization did not make women's work easier. It merely changed the nature of their labor. Long hunting expeditions were replaced by repetitive tasks performed from morning until night, day after day. Studies in paleopathology show that after the rise of agriculture, infectious diseases and illnesses associated with poor sanitation became much more widespread. For pregnant women and newborns, these threats were especially dangerous. Their enemies were no longer limited to predators or harsh winters, but now included invisible organisms that could not be seen with the naked eye. The agricultural revolution also brought positive changes. Women remained at the center of the household, not only raising children, but also managing food supplies, preserving essential skills, and passing knowledge on to future generations. It was these quiet, often overlooked responsibilities that enabled agricultural communities to flourish sustainably for thousands of years. So, was agriculture truly better for women? It created a stable food supply, fueled a population explosion, and paved the way for civilization, but it also brought greater reproductive demands, heavier labor, and more disease. Evolution has never offered humanity a perfect life. It has simply continued to replace one set of challenges with another. If you had the choice, would you rather live as a woman in a hunter-gatherer band, free, yet surrounded by uncertainty, or in a more stable farming village where life was more secure, but the burdens were greater? Perhaps that question reveals the most important lesson of this entire journey. What allowed humanity to survive and build civilization was not agriculture, tools, or cities alone, but the enduring ability of women to adapt to every change in nature and society. And with that, we arrive at the final question of this nearly 7 million year journey. Without the mothers who quietly endured every one of those challenges, would humanity ever have become the dominant species on Earth that it is today? The story of human evolution was shaped not only by hunts and inventions, but also by the millions of years during which prehistoric women sustained and nurtured life. From the earliest human species to Homo sapiens, they did far more than ensure the survival of the next generation. They played a direct role in shaping both the biological and social evolution of humanity. Our existence today stands as evidence of the extraordinary resilience of both women and men, who together carried humanity through Earth's greatest hardships and toward the dawn of civilization. Our ancestors were not predators. They were the ones being hunted. No claws, not fast enough to escape, not strong enough to fight back. Their existence stood constantly on the edge of extinction. Every night that passed could have been the final night of their entire species. But through sheer willpower and the bonds they formed with one another, they found a reason to survive. So what really happened in the darkness of millions of years of evolution, on the path that eventually turned us into human? There is a truth that sounds almost paradoxical. If you travel far enough back in time, you will never find a single moment when nature suddenly declared, "This is humanity." And nowhere does that become clearer than in Africa. Around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged, but not like a solitary flash of light in the darkness of evolution. Genetic and fossil evidence from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Homo Kibish in Ethiopia, and Florisbad in South Africa, approximately 260,000 years, are revealing a very different picture. Modern humans were not born in one place, but from a biological network stretching across Africa. Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago, was not a stable land. Climate shifted dramatically between wet and dry periods, causing forests to vanish and return, grasslands to expand and contract. Ancient humans were forced to keep moving in order to survive, creating populations that became separated, then met again. Under those conditions, evolution unfolded through constant contact between ancient human groups.
The time is right. Place it here. Now, twist it slowly. Yes, that's it.
Genes did not remain still. They were exchanged, blended, and reshaped across thousands of generations. This is why modern geneticists, including researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, affirm that there was no single ancestor for all humanity, but rather a large interconnected population linked by widespread gene flow. Small human groups lived scattered across savannas, open woodlands, and river margins. Yet, from an evolutionary perspective, this was an extremely effective system. It allowed humans to maintain genetic diversity, the essential ingredient for adapting to a constantly changing world. And within that network, something quiet but decisive was taking place. The human brain was beginning to change. Not through one sudden leap, but through tiny shifts across hundreds of thousands of years. The skull expanded, and regions of the cortex associated with social thinking and planning grew stronger. A lone individual could hardly survive against predators such as giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, or ancient crocodiles. Survival meant depending on the group. But what made Africa so special in this entire story? It was the only continent where humans could develop inside a vast natural laboratory, unstable climates, varied landscapes, and intensely competitive ecosystems. Every environmental shift acted like a continuous survival test, forcing humans to keep evolving. According to the Smithsonian Institution, environmental instability in Africa was one of the major forces driving the evolution of Homo sapiens. And it was there that the true nature of evolution began to reveal itself. If you traveled back in time, you would not see humans standing at the top of the food chain. You would see a world where life was measured by the ability to survive 1 second at a time. Between about 4.2 and 2 million years ago, across the expanding grasslands of Africa, species of the genus Australopithecus appeared. They stood only about 1 to 1.5 meters tall, with small brains of roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, no tools, and no weapons. Meanwhile, the surrounding ecosystem was a complete network of predators: saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, eagles that hunted primates, and ancient crocodiles capable of dragging prey underwater in seconds. According to paleobiological research from the Smithsonian Institution, mortality rates among ancient primates, especially juveniles, may have been extremely high because of predation pressure and constantly shifting environments. Only adapt or disappear, and within that harsh world, an invisible force began shaping their bodies, not brute strength, but the ability to see farther, move more efficiently, and most importantly, live in groups. But the more profound transformation was not in the body, it was in the brain. Living in a state of constant pursuit forced the brain to develop prediction. Where prey was, how predators moved, whether the group was safe. But at that moment, they were only creatures trying to hold on to life. And then a turning point would come. Around 3.2 million years ago, a fossil discovered in Ethiopia would change how we understand ourselves. It revealed something simple, yet revolutionary. Standing upright was not merely posture. It was the beginning of the entire human future. That fossil was Lucy, and from that moment on, the journey of evolution turned in a direction from which there would be no return. Research at the Smithsonian Institution has dated Lucy's skeleton to about 3.18 million years old, preserved so completely that scientists were able to reconstruct her gait with a level of accuracy never achieved before. But what made Lucy extraordinary was the way she moved. Lucy walked on 2 legs. That may sound simple, but in evolution, simplicity is often an illusion. Because standing upright was not merely a change in posture, it was a transformation in the entire way a creature interacted with the world. When the body shifted from 4 limbs to 2, a chain reaction of consequences began. In an environment where grasslands were gradually expanding across Africa, the ability to see dozens of meters farther could determine whether a predator was detected early enough or too late. A few seconds alone could create the boundary between life and death. The hands were freed, no longer needed to support the body. They began to carry food, protect the young, and later hold tools. This was the transition from a purely biological body to a body with extended functions. Studies in locomotor biology suggest that walking on two legs, under many terrain conditions, can require less energy than four-limbed movement in primates. Studies in locomotor biology suggest that walking on two legs, under many terrain conditions, can require less energy than four-limbed movement in primates. The pressure from predators in African ecosystems did not disappear. On the contrary, it grew stronger as grasslands expanded. That forced Australopithecus species to become more flexible in movement and survival. Then something even more important appeared. The separation between the body and the tools of survival began to form. Once the hands were no longer locked into locomotion, they could be used in entirely new ways. This became the foundation that, millions of years later, would allow Homo habilis to create the first stone tools. But Lucy was not just an individual. She represented a systemic turning point in evolution, from a creature completely dependent on the body to a creature beginning to expand its abilities through behavior. According to Nature Communications, the evolution of upright walking was one of the most important anatomical changes, directly influencing the pelvis, spine, and even the way energy was used in the bodies of early humans. And from there, the journey of evolution would enter a new age, where stone was no longer only stone, but became a tool of intelligence. And when humans first learned to turn the physical world into instruments of survival, it would be with Homo habilis. Between about 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago, within the same harsh ecosystem where Lucy once lived, a new evolutionary branch appeared in Africa. Paleoanthropologists call them Homo habilis, the handyman. It was a revolutionary biological leap. Intelligence began to directly intervene in matter. According to evidence from Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, the earliest stone tools, dated to around 2.6 million years ago, have been found there. This was the Oldowan tool culture, simple chipped stones, yet extraordinarily powerful in practical use. For the first time in the history of life, a species did not change its body. It changed external objects to compensate for its own weakness. Now, it was no longer muscle or fangs, but thought. And this was the first moment we can truly call technology. They still lived in the same predator-filled ecosystem. Giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, eagles that hunted primates. And under that pressure, something crucial began to happen. The human brain no longer only reacted, it began to plan. This was a very early form of cause and effect thinking, but one of immense importance in cognitive evolution. Studies of brain volume show that Homo habilis had a larger brain than Australopithecus, though still far from that of modern humans. Yet size alone did not determine everything. Here, the human hand began to change roles, no longer only an organ for movement or grasping. It became the interface between thought and the material world. A stone could now become a knife, a hammer, a tool. And from that moment, a new loop began. Tools improved survival. Better survival allowed greater brain development. Greater brain development created better tools. This was the starting point of what we now call cultural evolution. And once tools had appeared, the next step was to move farther, occupy more environments, and begin turning the entire planet into a space for survival. That was when a new human species emerged, stronger, more flexible, and for the first time capable of leaving the place where it was born. That species was Homo erectus, and the journey to conquer Earth had begun. Paleobiological evidence shows that Homo erectus appeared around 1.9 million years ago and survived for more than 1 million years, one of the longest-lasting human species ever known. They were the first humans to leave this continent and begin a migration on a planetary scale. Their remains have been found in Georgia, Dmanisi, China, Indonesia, Java, stretching from Africa into Eurasia, opening an entirely new age, the age of expanding human living space. But what allowed them to travel so far, while earlier ancestors remained limited by their environments? Homo erectus had a body structure far closer to modern humans than Homo habilis, longer legs suited for long-distance walking. A skeleton stronger, yet more compact, helping reduce energy use during movement. This was not a minor change, but a biological design built directly for endurance. According to research from the Smithsonian Institution and fossil analyses at Dmanisi, Homo erectus possessed extraordinary climate flexibility, adapting from the hot, dry grasslands of Africa to the temperate regions of Eurasia. But what truly made Homo erectus a turning point was the way they used tools. If Homo habilis had only begun to chip stone for survival, Homo erectus advanced to another level. Acheulean tools, hand axes crafted with symmetry, sharpness, and clear purpose. And from this point, something never before seen in evolutionary history began to emerge. Humans were not merely adapting to Earth, they were beginning to occupy it. Archaeological evidence suggests Homo erectus was capable of group hunting, constant movement in search of food, and living across more varied environments than any primate before them. Yet, despite being stronger and more intelligent, they still lived in an unfinished world. If you trace the entire journey back to Homo erectus, something strange emerges. Humans had already traveled far beyond Africa, had tools, and possessed remarkable endurance, yet they were still constrained by something invisible. They were still dependent on darkness, dependent on daylight, dependent on air that was warm enough, food that was soft enough, and most importantly, they still had to flee when the sun went down.
The shadows grow long. We must be ready.
Until something appeared and changed the entire rulebook of life: fire. Archaeological evidence suggests that the stable control of fire may have emerged as early as around 790,000 years ago, based on findings at Gesher Benot Yaakov, Israel, where scientists discovered ash remains, burned seeds, and stone tools altered by heat. At first, fire was dangerous, but very quickly it became the most powerful survival tool humans had ever possessed. A piece of raw meat might take hours to chew, but with fire, it became softer, safer, and richer in energy. That meant humans no longer had to spend all their time eating. They began to have extra time. And this is the point where evolution took an entirely new turn. Time was no longer spent solely on survival, it began to be spent on thinking. Fire also erased the fear of darkness. Humans transformed darkness into a space they could control and began to redefine it, and more importantly, around those flames, a behavior never before seen in nature began to emerge. Storytelling.
They showed us the path to the valley.
No fossil evidence records the sounds of the first stories, but social behavior strongly suggests it almost certainly happened. When a group of humans sat around a fire, their brains were no longer processing only danger. They began to build shared memory, exchange experiences, and transmit information. This was the first step of culture. Fire was changing the way humans connected with one another. Some evolutionary researchers, such as Richard Wrangham from Harvard, argue that cooking food with fire was the key factor that increased brain energy, thereby driving the development of social structures and language. It would reshape the entire picture of human evolution, and that is when the lost brothers began to appear. Before Homo sapiens became the only surviving human species, Earth was not home to just a single lineage of humanity. And among those lost branches, two in particular continue to challenge modern science, like a puzzle still missing its final piece: the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. These were not mythical beings. Neanderthals lived roughly between 400,000 and 40,000 years ago, primarily across Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans, on the other hand, remain far more mysterious, known only through a handful of bone fragments and DNA discovered in Denisova Cave in Siberia, Russia. They were extraordinarily well adapted to their environments. Neanderthals had short, powerful bodies, exceptionally strong musculature, and skulls that, on average, were larger than those of Homo sapiens. Some studies suggest their brain volume was comparable to, or even greater than, that of modern humans. They lived through the Ice Age, in conditions where temperatures in Europe could plunge below -20 degrees Celsius. They hunted mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and massive deer using coordinated group strategies. They controlled fire, crafted sophisticated Mousterian stone tools, and showed evidence of caring for the injured, something typically seen only in structured, socially complex groups. Denisovans left behind far fewer traces, but their DNA reveals a vast range, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. Even today, Some modern populations in Melanesia and Tibet carry up to 3 to 5% Denisovan DNA, associated with adaptations to high altitudes and extreme environments. Around 60,000 to 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began migrating out of Africa and expanding across the globe. And when these human species encountered one another, they did not simply compete, they interbred. Modern genetic evidence shows that most people outside Africa today carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. But why did only Homo sapiens endure? Homo sapiens developed the ability to expand social groups to hundreds, even thousands of individuals through shared language and collective belief. While Neanderthals may have been powerful yet scattered, Homo sapiens began building something entirely new, communities of ideas. And when we look back, we realize something profound. We are no longer a pure species. We are the result of blending, collision, and convergence among multiple ancient human lineages. If many human species once coexisted on Earth, what determined that only one would continue? Around 70,000 years ago, Earth did not change its shape. No asteroid struck. No global catastrophe was recorded. And yet, something profound happened. What science now calls the cognitive revolution. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that during this period, Homo sapiens began to display entirely new behaviors: complex language, symbolic expression, art, and abstract thought.
The hunter told us of a great beast.
Wow.
It is larger than the elders remember. We must prepare for the hunt.
After this turning point, they began to create new worlds within the mind. For the first time, something that did not physically exist could shape survival itself.
Look to the stars. They show us the path. We must follow the light, even when the shadows are long.
In caves such as Chauvet in France and Sulawesi in Indonesia, ancient paintings appear dating back over 30,000 to 40,000 years. Images of animals, handprints, and abstract symbols.
Notice the unique pigments here, unlike anything we've seen before. Yes, the detail is extraordinary. Look at the shading. See how it connects?
These images created shared meaning when a group of people could look at a symbol and understand the same idea. A new structure emerged, not biological, but social, and yet powerful enough to influence the behavior of hundreds at once.
We will be ready.
Humans began to live in two worlds simultaneously. One was the physical world, filled with danger, predators, and harsh climates. The other was an invisible world, constructed from memory, belief, and imagination. Humans began to believe that we mattered more than I. And to sustain groups of that scale, they created another invisible system: laws. Laws do not exist in nature. They leave no physical trace in stone or soil. And yet, they guide behavior more powerfully than instinct itself. Then came an even greater leap: gods, not born from ignorance, but from the need to unify belief among strangers. This was an evolutionary invention of social cohesion. And when these invisible systems came together,
The mountain
language,
spirit awakens. We must make the offering before the moon sets. Silence. We will not be rushed.
belief, law, and symbols, something entirely new emerged. The early civilization of ideas.
Tomorrow we share the work.
It is good this way.
No longer confined to Africa, no longer limited to a single region, humans began to leave their cradle. A migration unlike any in the history of life was about to begin, and when it did, Homo sapiens were no longer just a local species. They became the first global species. This was the beginning of Out of Africa, a conquest of Earth not driven by weapons, but by adaptability and imagination. Modern genetic and archaeological evidence shows that Homo sapiens began leaving Africa in a major wave around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, moving through the Arabian Peninsula into the Middle East, and eventually spreading across the vast expanse of Eurasia. But imagine that first moment they stepped beyond Africa, not as a migration, but as a leap into a world completely unknown. Only shifting climates, expanding landscapes, and territories the human body had never adapted to. Around 65,000 years ago, evidence of humans appears in Australia. To reach it, they had to cross open seas, one of the earliest maritime journeys ever undertaken by our species. This means that even without modern boats, without complete star maps, humans were capable of crossing oceans through a combination of observation, memory, and courage. Then, around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, humans set foot in the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge. During the last ice age, when sea levels were tens of meters lower than today. Humans crossed scorching deserts where temperatures could exceed 50 degrees Celsius. They moved into Siberia, where winters could fall below -40 degrees Celsius. They lived in humid tropical rainforests, where disease and moisture became invisible enemies. They climbed into the high Himalayas, where oxygen thins dramatically with altitude. No other primate had ever expanded its range in this way. This did not happen because the human body was perfect. Homo sapiens did not evolve to fit one place. They evolved to change how they live, depending on where they go.
Over here.
And that flexibility is rooted in everything that came before. From the stone tools of Homo habilis, from the fire mastered by our ancestors, from the Neanderthals we once interbred with, and from the cognitive revolution that turned ideas into tools for survival. But there is a paradox. The farther humans spread, the more different they became in appearance, skin color, and culture, yet the more alike they remained at their core. If humans were able to spread across the entire Earth in just tens of thousands of years, what happens when we are no longer confined to Earth? Each step forward was not an instant upgrade, but a survival response to environment, to hunger, to cold, and to the deep uncertainty of nature itself. Around 1 to 2% of the DNA in many people outside Africa comes from Neanderthals, and portions of Denisovan DNA still exist in populations such as those in Melanesia and Tibet. This means that we are not a single, straight line that outcompeted all others, but a complex hybrid result of multiple human lineages that once coexisted on this planet. When you look back across the entire journey, from Lucy walking the African savanna, to Homo erectus leaving the continent, to fire, to the lost human lineages, and finally to the cognitive explosion, you begin to see something strange. Human is not a destination, but an ongoing process. And if that is true, then the next question is no longer, where did we come from, but what are we becoming? Because evolution has never truly ended, it is simply shifting into a new form, where technology, artificial intelligence, and human consciousness itself are beginning to act as the next evolutionary forces. We often think of ourselves as standing at the pinnacle of evolution. But DNA tells a different story. Humans are the result of billions of years of life's experiment. So who are we? And where did that journey begin? There was a moment in Earth's history when everything was rewritten in just a matter of hours. Before that, this planet belonged to creatures that had dominated it for approximately 165 million years, the dinosaurs. In that world, mammals were merely small creatures, living hidden in the shadows. Then, around 66 million years ago, a colossal celestial object known as Chicxulub slammed into Earth, in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. This was not a single event, but a chain reaction on a planetary scale. The consequence was that approximately 75% of all species on Earth disappeared. The entire group of non-avian dinosaurs was wiped out. Ecosystems that had remained stable for tens of millions of years were completely shattered. But the most important thing was the void that followed. When the rulers vanished, vast ecological space opened up. The small creatures that had long been constrained mammals began entering an evolutionary experiment unlike anything before. Over the tens of millions of years that followed, mammals gradually came to occupy a wide range of habitats. One branch of them developed the ability to climb, live in trees, and eventually acquire crucial traits: forward-facing eyes, stereoscopic vision that allowed precise judgment of distance, and hands with opposable thumbs capable of grasping. These became the earliest foundations of the primates, the group of animals that would eventually lead to humans. Fossil evidence and modern ecological models point to one clear conclusion. Evolution does not follow a predetermined plan. It depends on unpredictable events and moments that alter the entire direction of life. From this perspective, the asteroid was a cosmic filter, removing a world that had dominated for too long and inadvertently clearing the way for another. Without it, the history of life might have been entirely different, and the concept of humanity may never have existed. And what is truly haunting is not the asteroid's destructive power, but the entire journey that ultimately led to human intelligence. Around 60 to 55 million years ago, after the world had just emerged from the aftermath of the mass extinction, a small branch of life began to appear, the first primates. They possessed an advantage that few other creatures had at that time: the ability to live in trees. At the same time, their hands were changing as well. Opposable thumbs became more developed, allowing precise gripping force between the thumb and the other fingers. What seemed simple became the foundation for every complex behavior that followed, from grasping branches and picking fruit to using tools. A small gesture on an ancient tree branch laid the first stone for the future ability to write, build machines, and construct cities. But evolution was not occurring only in the body. It was also unfolding quietly within the brain. Life in the trees forced primates to process enormous amounts of information. Which branch was strong enough? Which root was safe? Where food could be found? And most importantly, which members of the group could be trusted? Studies of modern primates reveal an important common pattern. The more complex a species' social life is, the more developed its brain tends to be. This is known in evolutionary biology as the social intelligence hypothesis. What is remarkable is that all the abilities modern humans take pride in, from planning and building social systems to creating language, can be traced back to very specific pressures. Not falling from a branch, not being left behind by the group, and not losing access to food within the complexity of a dense forest environment. Therefore, the human brain is not a perfect design in the modern sense. It is the product of millions of years of layered adaptations, sculpted by small but repeated risks within ancient forests. And within those canopies, a unique form of intelligence began to emerge. An intelligence capable of transcending the very environment that created it. And from that point forward, an entirely new evolutionary path began to unfold. There is a very common misconception. We often think intelligence was the starting point. But the fossil record tells a completely different story. Intelligence was not what appeared first. It was the final result of survival pressures that unfolded over millions of years. Around 7 to 5 million years ago, East Africa underwent a major climatic transformation. Dense forests were gradually replaced by expanding grasslands. In the forests, animals could hide, climb, and move between tree canopies. But on the grasslands, there was no shelter, no safe escape route. Every movement could be detected from a distance. Within this context, the first human-like creatures appeared. Sahelanthropus, Orion, and especially Ardipithecus ramidus, a species that lived approximately 4.4 million years ago. Standing only about 1.2 meters tall and weighing between 36 and 50 kilograms, They were not the rulers of their environment, yet they possessed a trait that would become a turning point: the ability to stand and move on two legs. What is remarkable is that upright posture appeared before the human brain began increasing significantly in size. Modern scientific hypotheses suggest that bipedal walking provided several specific advantages. By standing upright, the body reduced the amount of surface area directly exposed to sunlight, helping regulate temperature more efficiently in the hot grassland environment. As time continued to pass, an important figure emerged in the evolutionary record: Australopithecus afarensis, known through the famous fossil Lucy. Alongside it, many other species also appeared, existed in parallel, and then vanished without leaving descendants. Australopithecus africanus, Paranthropus, Kenyanthropus, all were different experiments of nature, each carrying its own solution to the same survival challenge. Then, sometime between approximately 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago, a new branch began to emerge: Homo habilis. This marked a clear turning point. For the first time in evolutionary history, a species began using stone tools systematically: the Oldowan culture. More importantly, this was the first time in the history of life on Earth that a species was not merely adapting to its environment, but was beginning to change the environment around it. There was no plan, no goal. Only life experimenting, eliminating, and continuing to push the boundaries of its own possibilities. In the history of evolution, there are fossils that do more than provide data. They completely change the way humans understand themselves. Lucy is one of them. When the skeleton of Australopithecus afarensis was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, it was not merely an archaeological discovery. Lived approximately 3.2 million years ago. Her body stood just over 1 meter tall, with a brain measuring roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, close to that of a modern chimpanzee. But what drew attention was not her size. It was the unusual combination of two traits: the ability to walk upright on two legs and a body structure that still carried traces of a climbing lifestyle. For decades, people believed that human evolution resembled a straight path, from ancient apes to primitive humans, and eventually modern Homo sapiens. But Lucy shattered that model. Fossilized bones, together with hundreds of later discoveries, revealed a far more complicated reality. Evolution is not a single stream, but a continuously branching network in which multiple species coexist, compete, and disappear in parallel. Some species developed powerful jaws for crushing tough vegetation. Others adapted to arid environments. Some retained body structures more similar to those of primates. We are one of the rare results that remain. When scientists study Lucy, they recognize something even more important than appearance: a behavioral transition. Although her brain remained small, the structure of her pelvis and legs suggests that upright walking had already become relatively stable. Standing upright was a process that unfolded over millions of years, long before intelligence began expanding dramatically. This was one of the most important turning points in biological history, because it demonstrates that evolution did not prioritize intelligence immediately. It prioritized survival within a changing environment. Species that could not adapt quickly enough disappeared. Species that adapted in different ways diverged into multiple parallel evolutionary paths. Under those pressures, some branches developed stronger bodies to cope with harsh conditions, while others retained smaller and more agile forms for flexible movement. Lucy is not merely a fossil. She is a milestone within a vast network where evolution does not select the best, but simply preserves what remains suited to an ever-changing world. And from within that very network, a new turning point was gradually beginning to emerge. For most of the history of life, every organism followed a silent rule: adapt in order to survive. They were constrained by climate, food availability, predators, and natural changes beyond their control. But between approximately 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago, a small branch of the human family broke that rule, not through physical strength, but through a simple yet revolutionary act: picking up a stone and turning it into a tool. That species was called Homo habilis. Compared to the species that came before, there was nothing particularly extraordinary about their bodies. Their brains measured only about 600 to 700 cubic centimeters. Their stature was small, and they remained heavily dependent on the natural environment. Yet in their hands appeared something entirely new in evolutionary history: Oldowan stone tools. Sharpened stone flakes used to cut meat, slice through hide, and break bones. This was not merely a small behavioral change. At its core, it was a profound biological turning point. For the first time, an animal species was no longer using only its body to interact with the world, but was using an external object to extend its ability to survive. These crude tools opened access to a source of energy that had previously remained largely untapped: meat and bone marrow from animal carcasses. When Homo habilis began using stones to break bones, they gained access to a far richer source of calories than a diet based solely on plants. In this case, the brain of Homo habilis gradually expanded to approximately 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, representing an important leap beyond earlier ancestors. But the most important change was not brain size itself. It was the emergence of a new evolutionary feedback loop. For the first time in the history of life, tools were not merely serving survival. They were beginning to reshape the very brain of the creature that created them. A simple yet symbolic example illustrates this shift. Rather than consuming only the soft tissues of animal carcasses, Homo habilis could use stones to crack open the femur bones of large animals and access the marrow inside, a rich source of energy-dense fat that many other predators could not easily exploit. More importantly, tool use marked the emergence of an evolutionary psychological change. The ability to imagine the function of an object. A stone was no longer just a stone. It could become a blade, a hammering tool, or a means of unlocking resources. This was the first step toward abstract thought in human history. As the number of tools increased, traces of them appeared across the landscape. Bones were split apart, animal carcasses were processed differently, and ecosystems began to feel the influence of a single species' behavior. Yet when viewed across the entirety of history, this was the beginning of a new era. An era in which organisms did not merely live within the natural world, but began restructuring it through deliberate action. And from those crudely shaped stones, another evolutionary threshold was gradually being prepared. Throughout the entire history of evolution, there have been technologies that were not invented in a single moment, but emerged from natural phenomena. Fire is one of them, the way humans came to control it. And that very moment marked the transition from a species living within nature to a species beginning to direct nature itself. Around 1.9 million years ago, Homo erectus appeared in the fossil record. This was a species that endured for more than 1.5 million years, a span of time so vast that it far exceeds the entire history of modern civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that the use of fire may have first appeared as early as 1 million years ago, and gradually became more common among ancient human groups. At first, fire was neither a manufacturing tool nor a technology. It was a natural phenomenon, wildfires sparked by lightning, volcanic activity, or climatic events. But rather than avoiding it like other species, Homo erectus learned to preserve it, maintain it, and eventually control it. Raw meat, tough roots, and hard-to-digest tubers all became more accessible when cooked. This process not only softened food, but also broke down protein structures and eliminated many pathogens. As a result, the body spent less energy on digestion while absorbing more nutrients. As food became more energy-rich and easier to digest, the body could invest more resources into the brain. A larger brain, in turn, supported better learning abilities, improving the use of fire, hunting skills, and cooperation. And this cycle continued to amplify itself over hundreds of thousands of years. Another transformative development was the change in social rhythms. Fire was not only for cooking, it extended the hours of wakefulness each day. Instead of retreating into darkness, groups of Homo erectus could gather around the light, exchange behaviors, observe one another, and maintain social interactions for longer periods. Imagine a group of ancient humans sitting around a fire in the middle of the savannah, while darkness envelops everything beyond its glow and predators continue to lurk outside. With fire, humans could survive in colder climates where long-term habitation had previously been impossible. This paved the way for future migrations out of Africa, as ancient human groups began expanding their range across increasingly diverse environments. Although the brain of Homo erectus accounted for only about 2% of body weight, it consumed nearly 20% of the body's energy. Fire did not merely change the way humans ate, it changed the way humans existed. This was the first time a living organism was no longer completely dependent on external conditions, but began reshaping those conditions according to its own needs. And when a species can control energy, control food, and control its environment at a fundamental level, a new evolutionary threshold begins to emerge. A threshold where biology is no longer the only limitation. For a very long time, modern humans believed that we were the only remaining human species, the final pinnacle of a linear evolutionary process. But in the 21st century, a quiet revolution in biology completely shattered that picture. Not through new fossils, but through something far smaller, ancient DNA. Modern genetic data confirmed that around 40,000 years ago, the world was not inhabited solely by Homo sapiens. Living alongside us were Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in Asia, and other mysterious branches such as Homo floresiensis in Indonesia and Homo naledi in Africa. These were fully human species, existing simultaneously within the same geological period. Even more surprising is that we were not completely separate from them. Modern DNA analyses show that most people outside Africa still carry approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Oceania even carry additional traces of Denisovan ancestry. This means that in the distant past, multiple human species not only coexisted, but also interbred and exchanged genes. One specific example is that Neanderthal genes in modern humans are associated with adaptation to cold climates and aspects of the immune system. This suggests that encounters between ancient human species were not merely moments of contact, but events that left biological signatures lasting to the present day. This creates a profound paradox. Our sense of uniqueness is actually only a brief moment within a history spanning millions of years. But why is Homo sapiens the only one left? The answer does not lie in physical strength. Neanderthals, for example, possessed more robust bodies, were better adapted to harsh, cold environments, and were capable of using tools of comparable complexity. The crucial difference appears to have been in the organization of society and the processing of information. Homo sapiens developed broader social networks that enabled cooperation among unrelated groups. Language became more flexible. serving not only direct communication, but also the transmission of abstract ideas. Knowledge was no longer confined to individuals or small groups, but began accumulating across generations. A clear example can be seen in the spread of technology. While an ancient human group might learn how to make a tool within a community of only a few dozen individuals, Homo sapiens possessed the ability to spread that knowledge across thousands of people over vast geographic distances. Added to this was an extraordinary capacity for adaptability. Rather than depending on a specific environment, Homo sapiens could alter behavior, tools, and survival strategies to fit a wide variety of conditions. This leads to a profound reversal in perspective. Homo sapiens is not the endpoint of human evolution, but the only surviving branch remaining after a long process of diversification followed by gradual contraction. There is a familiar assumption in evolutionary history. The species that survives until the end must be the strongest. But when we examine the fossil record and genetic evidence, that assumption begins to fall apart. Homo sapiens were not the strongest. We are the last surviving species in a competition where physical strength was not the deciding factor. Between approximately 400,000 and 40,000 years ago, Earth was home to more than one human species. Evidence from fossils and ancient DNA indicates that at least several Homo species coexisted. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, and possibly even Homo naledi in South Africa. This has been confirmed clearly through ancient DNA research conducted during the 2010s and 2020s, when the genomes of Neanderthals and Denisovans were successfully decoded. They had more robust bodies, thicker bones, and were better adapted to the harsh, cold climates of Ice Age Europe. Archaeological evidence also indicates that they produced sophisticated stone tools associated with the Mousterian culture, used fire, and showed signs of caring for the sick and elderly within their communities. If we evaluate individuals alone, Neanderthals may even appear superior to Homo sapiens in many aspects of physical survival. So why did they disappear? The answer does not lie in physical strength, but in social structure and the ability to accumulate information. Homo sapiens developed broader social networks. Their language was not used solely for communication, but also for transmitting complex information, hunting plans, manufacturing knowledge, and even stories and symbols. Meanwhile, Neanderthals appear to have lived in smaller, more isolated groups. This limited the speed at which knowledge could spread. An innovation could disappear along with a single group rather than spreading across an entire continent. A simple example illustrates the difference. If one group developed a more effective hunting technique, Homo sapiens could spread that knowledge to thousands of others throughout a social network. Genetic evidence also reveals another important truth. We did not completely replace the other human species. Modern humans outside Africa carry approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, and some populations in the Asia-Pacific region carry additional Denisovan DNA. This means that interbreeding occurred between different human species. Rather than a simple process of elimination, human history was a far more complex web of interaction. Nevertheless, the survival of Homo sapiens ultimately led to a clear outcome. Only we remain because we were more flexible in the way we organized society and processed information. If strength does not determine who survives, then what truly defines a human being? Between approximately 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began expanding out of Africa in a major wave of migration, spreading across Asia, Europe, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the widespread appearance of cave art, jewelry, complex tools, and signs of intentional burial rituals. A drawing on stone was no longer just a drawing. It became collective memory. A burial ritual was no longer merely an action performed upon the dead. It became a story about existence beyond death. Homo sapiens developed the ability to create and believe in entities that did not exist in nature, yet existed within the collective mind. Over time, those entities became the foundations of the modern world. Money, nations, religions, laws, corporations. None of these are tangible objects like stone or water. Yet millions, even billions of people believe in them. And because of that, they become real in social behavior. What is remarkable is that other human species that once existed, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, also possessed intelligence, tools, and perhaps even language to some degree. But current evidence suggests that they did not develop symbolic systems of comparable complexity on the scale achieved by Homo sapiens. But a group of Homo sapiens could become a collective intelligence greater than the sum of its individual members through shared imagined agreements. Looking back, this reveals an evolutionary paradox. Humans did not dominate because they were stronger, but because they could synchronize belief. An invisible system, yet powerful enough to reshape the behavior of an entire planet. And from this point forward, the question was no longer, who are we within nature, but rather, what have we become once we gained the ability to create reality through belief? From primitive organisms to modern civilization, this entire history of survival has been recorded in fossils, encoded within DNA, and preserved in the very structure of our bodies today. Understanding our origins is the only way to accurately locate humanity's place within this planet's billions of years-long history of life. A species granted consciousness by the universe to reflect upon itself. There is a paradox that has shaped the entire history of humanity. For 300,000 years, humans existed only to survive. But just 11,700 years ago, everything suddenly changed. The climate became more stable after the last ice age. Only a few thousand years later, agriculture appeared, and civilizations began to rise one after another. Was it merely a coincidence of history? Or did the Holocene itself open the door for human civilization to be born? To understand why civilization emerged only during the Holocene, we must first travel back to the end of the Pleistocene, a world that was almost unrecognizable compared to the planet we live on today. Millions of square kilometers across North America, Northern Europe, and Northern Asia lay buried beneath ice sheets several kilometers thick. South of the glaciers stretched the Mammoth Steppe, a vast cold and dry grassland ecosystem extending from Western Europe across Siberia all the way to Alaska. It was the homeland of giant creatures such as the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, ancient bison, the Irish elk with antlers spanning nearly 4 meters, and many other megafauna, the true rulers of Earth for tens of thousands of years. What is remarkable is that Homo sapiens at that time were almost no different from us in terms of intelligence. They crafted extraordinarily sophisticated stone spear points, sewed animal skin clothing to withstand the cold, mastered fire, coordinated strategic hunts, and even created breathtaking works of art on cave walls such as those found at Lascaux and Chauvet. Their brains were no less developed than those of modern humans. This raises a profound paradox. If humans had been intelligent for so long, why did it take more than 300,000 years for civilization to appear? During certain periods, temperatures across the northern hemisphere could rise or fall by dozens of degrees Celsius within just a few decades, a rate fast enough to completely transform entire landscapes. Nature was constantly changing, and every living thing was forced to change with it. As a result, humans had little choice but to keep moving. Archaeological evidence suggests that most hunter-gatherer groups consisted of only a few dozen individuals. In such a world, building permanent homes, storing large food reserves, or claiming ownership of land had little practical meaning. Even food supplies were highly unpredictable. Wild fruits, seeds, and tubers appeared only seasonally, while the seasons themselves shifted unpredictably. When every decision was focused on surviving the next few days or weeks, people could not afford to think in terms of plans that stretched across months or years. That is why, throughout nearly the first 300,000 years of Homo sapiens history, there were no cities, no large-scale agriculture, no writing systems, and no civilizations. Yet after hundreds of thousands of years of upheaval, Earth itself began to change. For the first time, the forces of nature were no longer working against humanity. Instead, they gradually created the conditions for an entirely new way of life to emerge. About 11,700 years ago, after the cold Younger Dryas period came to an end, the planet entered a new era known as the Holocene. Data collected from ice cores drilled more than 3 kilometers deep in Greenland reveals a very clear shift. For tens of thousands of years before that, temperatures had fluctuated violently, sometimes surging upward and then plunging downward like the heartbeat of an unstable planet. But when the Holocene began, that curve became significantly more stable, with a climate steady enough for the rhythms of the seasons to begin repeating from one year to the next. This process lasted for many millennia, releasing a massive amount of fresh water into the oceans and causing global sea levels to rise by more than 120 meters, compared to the peak of the Ice Age. Doggerland, the vast plain that once linked the British Isles to Europe, where archaeologists have found animal bones, stone tools, and traces of human presence, sank beneath the North Sea. The Bering Land Bridge, the pathway that had once allowed humans and animals to migrate between Siberia and North America, also vanished beneath the strait we know today. Farther south, the continent of Sahul was divided by rising seas, turning Australia and New Guinea into 2 separate lands. The familiar map of our world began to take shape during this very period. But the most important change did not happen in the oceans. It happened on land. The Mammoth Steppe, the cold grassland ecosystem that once stretched from Western Europe to Alaska and sustained countless giant animals, began to shrink and then disappear. But these giant animals needed wide-open grasslands to find hundreds of kilograms of vegetation each day. As forests replaced grasslands, their food sources disappeared as well. To this day, scientists continue to debate the relative roles of climate change and human hunting. Earth itself was the first to change, as if the planet had prepared a stage before humanity stepped onto it. For the first time, humans could begin to think about the future instead of merely trying to survive the next winter. Civilization was not born from a single brilliant idea that appeared in one sudden moment. But the emptiness it left behind opened an entirely new question. When nature finally became stable, how would humanity respond? As the Holocene climate gradually stabilized, a strange phenomenon began to appear across Earth. Between about 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, human communities living thousands of kilometers apart, separated by high mountains, deserts, and oceans, seemed to make almost the exact same decision. They began planting crops instead of only hunting and gathering. Why did people who had never met one another begin changing in the same direction? In the Fertile Crescent of Western Asia, humans began domesticating einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, and barley around 11,000 years ago. In the Yangtze River Basin, the first rice paddies slowly took shape, while in the Yellow River Basin, millet became the main food source because it was adapted to a drier climate. On the highlands of New Guinea, indigenous people domesticated bananas and taro. In Central America, maize was developed from a wild grass known as teosinte. In the Andes, potatoes became the foundation of life for mountain communities. While in many parts of Africa, sorghum and native millet were also selected over many generations. What makes this especially remarkable is that these communities almost had no knowledge of one another's existence. If there was no spread of knowledge, what caused them to change together? In reality, hunter-gatherers had understood the plant world extremely well, long before agriculture existed. The ancestor of modern maize was teosinte, a wild grass with only a few small kernels enclosed in a hard casing. After thousands of years of human selection, large ears of corn with hundreds of softer kernels gradually appeared, to the point that they could no longer disperse their seeds naturally without humans. Wheat went through a similar process when it lost the trait of naturally shedding its seeds, making it more suitable for harvest. This shows that agriculture was not an invention that happened in a single day, but the result of millennia in which humans quietly guided the evolution of crops. But what is even more fascinating is that humans changed crops, and crops also began to change humans. When food could be produced in one fixed location, constant migration was no longer the best option. For the first time in history, humans were no longer merely searching for food. They made food grow where they lived. But to turn fields into complex societies, humans still needed one more crucial element, one that would change history in a way no less profound. At that very moment, another revolution quietly began. Humans no longer merely lived among animals. They began living with them and depending on them. Studies in archaeology, genetics, and evolutionary biology show that this was a process of coevolution. Humans selected the gentlest, easiest to raise, and most useful individuals. The first companion to appear very early was the dog. DNA analysis and archaeological evidence suggest that dogs were domesticated from gray wolves at least around 15,000 to more than 20,000 years ago, and possibly even earlier. Entirely on unpredictable hunts, and even greater turning point came from the draft power of livestock. livestock. Farmland expanded, food production increased, and populations began to grow at an unprecedented rate. For the first time in history, human muscle power was supplemented by the strength of another species. It was a breakthrough no less important than the invention of agriculture. About 5,500 years ago, on the Eurasian steppes, another revolution took place when horses were domesticated. At first, they were raised for meat and milk, but not long afterward, humans realized that the greatest value of horses was not in food, but in speed. Journeys that once took weeks to complete could now be measured in days. Trade expanded, information traveled faster, and later, warfare would be transformed completely. But every alliance comes with a cost. As humans and livestock lived close together in increasingly crowded villages, pathogens also found opportunities to cross the barriers between species. Many studies in genetics and pathology suggest that some major human infectious diseases originated from domesticated animals. Looking back, it is difficult to say who changed whom more. That silent alliance did not merely help humans survive, it also created an ever-growing amount of wealth. Trade expanded, information traveled faster, and later, warfare would be transformed completely. But every alliance comes with a cost. As humans and livestock lived close together in increasingly crowded villages, pathogens also found opportunities to cross the barriers between species. Many studies in genetics and pathology suggest that some major human infectious diseases originated from domesticated animals. Looking back, it is difficult to say who changed whom more. That silent alliance did not merely help humans survive. It also created an ever-growing amount of wealth, and when wealth began to accumulate, history entered an entirely new chapter. For hundreds of thousands of years, as humans lived by hunting and gathering, they existed under one simple rule. Whatever they found today, they consumed today. There were no long-term reserves, no accumulated wealth, and no tomorrow safe enough to invest in the future. But when agriculture combined with the climate stability of the Holocene, a non-linear leap occurred. Food production began to exceed immediate survival needs. For the first time in evolutionary history, humans created something they did not need to eat right away in order to survive. A surplus that could be stored. That was the moment civilization began. Because surplus food was not merely food, it was social fuel. When a community could produce more food than it needed, part of the population was freed from the fields. They no longer had to hunt or plant every day. From that point, entirely new roles appeared. Toolmakers, potters, early architects, priests, warriors, and community organizers. But as soon as food began to be stored, a new problem emerged. Who would control it? At Jericho, one of the oldest settlements in the world around 10,000 years ago, humans built massive stone walls and a watchtower not only to defend against enemies, but also to protect food stores. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, thousands of people lived closely together in connected houses, with grain stored directly inside living spaces. At Mehrgarh in Pakistan, fired clay storage facilities for wheat and barley appeared around 9,000 years ago. These structures reveal an important truth. The first civilization did not revolve around palaces, but around food stores. Those who controlled food could decide who ate, who had to work, who had the right to use land, and who was excluded from the system. From here, concepts that seem obvious today began to take shape. Ownership, wealth accumulation, and social inequality. But when thousands of sacks of grain began to be stored, a new human limit appeared: memory. And from this pressure of management, one of the most important inventions in history was born. In the Fertile Crescent about 8,000 years ago, humans began using small clay tokens of different shapes to represent goods. From the need to record food, writing was born. Surplus food did not merely feed more people. It created time, created professions, created property, power, and rules. And that need would open a new leap, where memory no longer belonged to the individual, but to an entire civilization. In hunter-gatherer communities, trust was built through familiar faces, through voices, through direct memory. But in Uruk, where there may have been as many as 40,000 to 50,000 residents around 3,200 BCE according to archaeological estimates, most people had never met one another. They did not know who belonged to the same tribe, who was cheating, who controlled the grain stores, or who gave the orders. That was when another invention appeared, one not carved into clay, not built from brick, yet more powerful than any monument: systematized trust. In Mesopotamia, early administrative texts did not merely record grain or labor, but gradually formed fixed rules about ownership, exchange, and responsibility. When a clay tablet stated that Cusham received 29,086 measures of barley, the issue was no longer the number itself, but this: the entire community had to agree that the number was real. And when that agreement expanded across tens of thousands of people, it became the first foundation of law. Archaeological evidence from cities such as Uruk and later Ur indicates that, alongside writing, standardized systems of measurement also appeared. A unit of labor had to carry a fixed value. What may seem technical was, in reality, a psychological revolution. Humans began to trust abstract concepts more than their own direct experience. And that was the leap no animal species before them had ever achieved. Those who controlled writing, first scribes, then temples and palaces, became the coordinating centers of society. In ancient Egypt, tax records along the Nile did not merely record agricultural output, but also determined who was exempt from taxation and who had to contribute more. In the Indus Valley, commercial seals reveal the existence of a tightly controlled system of goods, even though we still have not fully deciphered their language. In ancient China, oracle bone script was initially used not only for record keeping, but also to legitimize political decisions through divine prediction. A decisive detail was this: writing made society controllable on a large scale. From that point on, decisions relied on documents that could be stored, copied, and compared. Laws became more stable, taxation more accurate, and large-scale projects such as irrigation canals, city walls, or temples could be carried out across many consecutive generations without being interrupted by the death of any one individual. The clearest example is the canal systems of Mesopotamia and Egypt, where water management could not depend on the memory of individual farmers, but required precise records of water levels, flood timing, and labor allocation. But the most important thing was not the technique. It was the philosophical consequence. For the first time, humans lived in a world where truth no longer depended on the memory of living people. Anthropological studies indicate that in small-scale societies, trust can be maintained through direct interaction. But once a society passes the threshold of several thousand to tens of thousands of people, belief systems begin to diverge. In the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River, we see a repeating pattern. Early religious and symbolic systems first served to bind society together. But over time, they became increasingly complex and branched. Temples were not only places of worship, but also economic centers, where food was stored, labor was distributed, and power was legitimized. For example, in Uruk and the Sumerian city-states, cuneiform texts show that temples owned much of the land and coordinated agricultural production. This made the boundary between spiritual ideas and material mechanisms almost disappear. However, that very blending created an even stronger effect. Ideas began to become organized. Instead of existing only in rituals or oral tradition, they were standardized into laws, doctrines, and systems of power. A typical example is the rise of empires such as Assyria and later Achaemenid Persia, where administrative systems, law, and religious belief were used side by side to govern territories stretching across thousands of kilometers. Historical studies show that many major conflicts in the ancient world were not only about resources, but also about differences in belief systems, the way each civilization explained the world, and its own place within it. From this point on, ideas were no longer something that stood above society, but became part of the very structure of society. They spread like a form of cultural organism, competing, changing, and adapting to political, economic, and military environments. Ideas that help societies function more effectively expanded, while ideas that no longer fit were eliminated or transformed. And in that process, something unprecedented in the history of evolution happened. Humans no longer lived only in the physical world created by nature, but also in a second layer of the world built entirely from shared beliefs, symbols, and ideas. This layer could not be touched, yet it could bring down cities, raise empires, or change the course of history. As the boundary between idea and reality grew increasingly blurred, humanity began entering a new stage where power no longer lay only in understanding the world, but also in the ability to expand and control the very systems of ideas operating within it. In the ice cores of Antarctica and Greenland, from the time agriculture spread, and even more strongly after the industrial era, the atmosphere began to carry the signs of a system being affected from within. Alongside that, stratigraphy, the science that reads Earth's memory, began to detect anomalies that are difficult to explain by nature alone. Sediment layers across continents show traces of charcoal from large-scale forest burning. A sharp decline in wild plant pollen replaced by crop pollen and the appearance of artificial agricultural soils that geologists call anthracene. in many regions of Europe, China, and the Middle East. These changes began around 8,000 to 5,000 years ago, coinciding with the expansion of agriculture and long-term settlement systems. A clear example comes from the Fertile Crescent, where the first irrigation systems of Mesopotamia not only sustained cities such as Uruk and Babylon, but also permanently changed the structure of the soil. As water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was directed through a network of artificial canals, evaporation left mineral salts accumulating in the soil. In ancient Europe and East Asia, lake sediment layers show a sharp decline in tree pollen. Replaced by an increase in crop plants and artificial grasslands. By the time empires such as Rome, Han China, and the civilizations of the Americas had developed, this footprint had expanded even further. The clearest turning point came when modern science became able to view Earth as a system of data. Ice cores show an unprecedented rise in greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide and methane. Beyond the natural fluctuations of the previous hundreds of thousands of years. But the most thought-provoking thing is not that humans changed Earth, but the speed of that change. What will happen when the planet itself begins to respond to those changes? In a system where every balance has been stretched to its final limit. The Holocene, in the seemingly calm view of human history, was not actually a stable era in the absolute sense, but a narrow range of fluctuation between Earth's enormous upheavals. Even in the most peaceful age, Earth never truly stood still. It simply fluctuated more gently, enough for humans to begin planting crops, settling down, and building complex societies. Climate data from ice cores shows that temperatures in the North Atlantic region dropped sharply over a short period on a geological timescale. Only about 160 to 200 years. The cause has been linked to a massive volume of fresh water from the glacial Lake Agassiz Ojibwe in North America, spilling into the ocean. disrupting global heat circulation. In the Near East, where the first farming communities were forming, archaeological traces show that some settlements shrank or moved, reflecting sudden environmental pressure on young survival systems. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, one of humanity's first centralized political systems, collapsed during this period. In the Indus River Valley, cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro gradually declined and were abandoned. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom fell into a deep political and social crisis. The important point is that these disturbances did not destroy civilizations in a single moment. But exposed weaknesses that had accumulated within social systems. Water management, food distribution, and the ability of political institutions to adapt. From a long-term perspective, the Holocene was therefore not a peaceful straight line. But a narrow corridor of relative stability. Where natural fluctuations remain low enough for humans to survive and develop. And it is precisely at the intersection between relative stability and accumulated disturbance that a larger question begins to appear. Not whether the Holocene was stable, but what will happen when that stability is pulled beyond the limits that nurtured all of human history. Civilization was not born from a perfect environment. But from the ongoing adaptation between humans and a planet that is always shifting. The Holocene was never absolutely still. Now, we have moved in the opposite direction, and become a geological force capable of reshaping the planet. The closing of this stable age is a reminder that every balance is temporary. When the only climate structure that has nurtured civilization begins to break, the ultimate question is this: does humanity have enough wisdom to survive on an Earth that has transformed itself? Thank you for staying with WUFO Space until the very end of this journey through the vast universe. If you found this video interesting and insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WUFO Space so you won't miss our next cosmic adventures. Your support means the world to us and fuels our passion to keep exploring the wonders beyond.